Have you ever gone through a breakup or maybe watched a friend go through one? And the first reaction isn't, sadness, but relief? A weird kind of quiet. Well, today we're going to dive into the story behind that exact feeling and unpack an emotional journey that is way more common than you might think. So, our story kicks off right here with a thought that sounds completely reasonable, right? I need to focus on me. It feels so clear, so logical, almost like there's no other choice. This is the moment the decision is made. But it's everything that happens before this moment, and especially what happens after, that really tells the true story. All right, let's step inside the mind of the person who's about to end things. What's that internal conversation sound like? The one that leads them to finally pull the plug? It often doesn't start with some big dramatic fight, but with this slow, creeping feeling. It starts with that feeling, that the spark's just gone. A sense that the relationship has kind of hit a wall. And that leads to a pretty practical question. If there's no future here, why keep putting in the time and energy? It feels like a smart, logical move, like you're just cutting your losses. But there's usually another layer to it. And here's where it gets really interesting. The trigger. See, as one partner starts to pull away, the other person naturally senses that distance, right? So they try to get closer, to talk it out, to figure out what's wrong. But for the person pulling away, that attempt to connect, it doesn't feel like love. It feels like pressure. It gets overwhelming, and that internal thought shifts from, this isn't working, to, I have to get out of here. That need for space becomes this urgent, desperate need to be single again. So, the breakup happens, and now we get to the most baffling part of this whole experience. What happens right after? You'd expect tears, maybe some regret, a big sense of loss. But a lot of the time, that is not what shows up first. Okay, this is where the real confusion kicks in. We're all taught that breakups are supposed to be devastating, but in this story, the first thing they feel is relief, a really deep sense of numbness. It's almost like a switch was flipped and all the emotional circuits just went dark. And we're not just talking about a lack of sadness here, it's an absence of any feeling. This quote just perfectly captures that feeling, doesn't it? A total shutdown. All that anxiety and pressure that was building up before the breakup, it's suddenly gone. And in its place is this weird, unnerving quiet. But as we're about to see, this calm is just temporary. It's really the quiet before a very, very different storm. Because, let's be real, emotions don't just disappear into thin air. They just get postponed. That initial wave of relief, it's just the first act in a much longer, much more complicated story that unfolds over time. So check out this timeline, because it's so important. Day one, you've got that relief, that numbness, but then, maybe a couple weeks later, the guilt starts to creep in. Why don't I feel worse? Is something wrong with me? Then, after a month or so, it sinks in that they totally blindsided their partner, and that feels awful. And then finally, maybe 2 months out, once all that initial noise is faded, a huge wave of depression and loneliness just hits them hard. And this right here, this is the real pain. It's that realization that this isn't just a one-off thing. It's a pattern. That word, again, is everything. It means this has happened before, pushing away people they genuinely cared about, and getting stuck in this heartbreaking cycle of loss and regret. So what do you do with that kind of crushing loneliness? Well, a very common reaction is to just get back out there. The dating apps start looking pretty good, not just to find someone new, but to escape that awful feeling of being alone. The problem is, this often just resets the entire cycle, starting the whole thing all over again. So up to now, we've really been talking about the what, this whole emotional roller coaster. But to really understand what's going on, we have to look at the why. What is the deep, psychological reason that's driving this entire pattern? And the explanation really comes down to something called an avoidant attachment style. At its heart, it's this deeply rooted belief, often formed way back in childhood, that being vulnerable and emotionally close to another person is fundamentally dangerous. So the closer someone tries to get, the bigger the threat feels. Let's just walk through how this plays out in real time. First, the trigger. A partner wants or needs some emotional intimacy. Internally, that translates to a feeling of being unsafe, of being dangerously vulnerable. And this isn't just a thought, it's a physical reaction. The nervous system literally kicks into a flee response, like an animal trying to escape a predator. And the result? This overwhelming biological urge to run, to end it, to just get away and be alone. And this is the absolute key to understanding this. For someone with this attachment pattern, being alone isn't really about being independent, it's about being safe. It is the only time their nervous system can finally relax because no one is making those emotional demands that feel so threatening. So that initial relief after a breakup, that's the feeling of finally getting back to safety. And all of this leads to this central conflict, this painful paradox that just keeps the whole cycle going. It's a classic catch-22, a trap that feels impossible to get out of. And this is the painful paradox right here. When they're in a relationship, the need for closeness feels trapping, overwhelming, suffocating. But when they're single, the very thing they ran towards to feel safe, they eventually feel profoundly lonely and depressed. They can't feel safe with someone, but they can't feel connected without them. Which leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? If getting close feels like a trap, but being distant just leads to loneliness, how on earth do you break a cycle like that? It's a powerful dilemma. And just understanding this pattern is the first step. Figuring out how to break it, well, that's the real journey.